Welcome and good morning. I'm Steve Pearson. I'm the president of ICER, and it's a real pleasure to welcome all of you to our webinar around the launch of ICER Analytics. If we can go to the next slide, please. Great. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction, but the majority of the webinar today will be led by Dr. Surya Singh, who is a senior advisor to us at ICER and has helped us develop and launch ICER Analytics. And he's the former vice president and chief medical officer for specialty pharmacy at CVS. We'll also be joined by Susan Schiff, who's the senior VP and head of the Center for Observational and Real World Evidence, or CORE, at Merck, and by Pat Gleason, who's the assistant vice president for health outcomes at Prime Therapeutics. So first, let me just say that for us at ICER, this really is an exciting time. In many ways, ICER Analytics is a culmination of years of our work and hope that we could bring evidence and an independent analysis of both clinical effectiveness and value and bring that into the US healthcare system in a way that would really catalyze a different approach to talking about evidence, to talking about value, not just between the major stakeholders, but with the public also much more engaged than they have been. So for us, this is a real culmination that includes, in a way, a way to take our work and make it more actionable, to make it more transparent, and also to really support innovation by other people who will use our work in many different ways. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So as many of you know, ICER Analytics is a new cloud-based platform that takes our evidence reports and the underlying analyses from our from our economic models and really tries to put it into a format that can help decision makers and others. And we're going to be talking about several of the different ways that we think that this can help kind of catalyze new actions. But let me just run through a few really briefly now. So first, we're going to talk about how ICER Analytics should help many different people develop benefit designs, new types of benefit designs. It'll help people who are engaged in the trenches of designing formularies, looking at the evidence themselves, looking for outside sources to complement their own work, and trying to figure out how formularies can best reflect the best available evidence. We'll talk about from the life science side how it can help planning in the drug development, how it could do a lot of hypothetical analyses that would help suggest either different aspects around pricing or the types of research, clinical effectiveness thresholds to merit certain kind of price points. So we'll talk about that. And then also, as we do talk a fair amount about pricing and how it's linked to access, this will be a tool that we think will allow a lot of different participants in the process to get their own window on drug pricing and how it can link to the best available evidence. So negotiating drug reimbursement as part of all of that will be an important feature of what we hope that ICER Analytics will really allow people to do. So just so you know, we're very excited for many reasons about this, but again, it's a culmination and a launch of a new way that we think that we can move from the insights that our work has been able to provide to make it more actionable and more transparent and to trigger innovation. We're very pleased that over 150 organizations have already approached us to gain a free trial of this platform that we'll be talking through. This includes, again, kind of a very broad component or reflection of the healthcare landscape. It includes life science companies, it includes major payers, both public and private, including Medicaid programs and others. It includes international health technology assessment organizations. It includes coalitions of purchasers, employers, and others. It includes consultancies, Wall Street and investor concerns, and very happily from our perspective, very many patient organizations that want to, again, take that opportunity for them to become engaged and to have all the tools that others do around these issues. So we're very pleased to be able to start this process and to learn along with you about how to catalyze a real community of people who want to bring evidence into the system, use it in new ways, and ultimately achieve that vision of having pricing linked to value for patients and society in a way that really allows us to offer outstanding access to patients and sustainably do so for the long term. So let me hand it over to Surya Singh at this point, who will be leading you through the initial demonstration of the different components of ICER Analytics as a platform. Surya?
All right. Thanks so much, Steve. Everyone, pleased to be with you. I know this has been a real sort of process and undertaking for the ICER organization. So first of all, let me say thank you to Steve and to his team. When I originally sort of approached them with this concept that I thought there was an opportunity to create tools that could really take the enormously impactful and helpful insights that they've been generating, that I know a lot of you on the phone are very familiar with, and bring it into a cloud-based platform. I have to say that I did not anticipate that it would be exactly what we've ended up with today, but I hope that you'll see that this is an incredibly powerful platform, I think, and you all will take it to the next level of finding ways that it can be used that we have not yet envisioned. So Steve went over things that we've thought about, and I think, as I go through this, I encourage you all, although we don't have time today to take questions given the limited amount of time we have together, we will obviously be very interested in your thoughts, feedback, and questions. So definitely, as you watch me go through this, archive those, because we'll have an opportunity to discuss them. So after you log into the platform, you're brought to this first screen. And ICER Analytics, as Steve described at the highest level, is a cloud-based platform. You see a short description on the left, but it has two components. The first box you see there, a card, is called the Evidence Compendium, and that will take you to that portion of the system. And the one on the right is called the Interactive Modeler. I'm going to go into each of them in some detail, and then sort of give you a few highlights, tying back to the use cases that Steve outlined at the beginning in each of these systems. So in order to do that, I'm going to just do it predominantly as one at a time, Evidence Compendium, Interactive Modeler. But while we're looking at this first overview, I just want to make the point, these systems talk to each other, and we very much see this as a singular platform, ICER Analytics, that has two tightly coupled components. So as I go into the Evidence Compendium, the quick overview statement about Evidence Compendium is, if you look at the work that ICER has done, and you go retrospectively and you're looking for the highlights of that work in an easy to use format and place, that's really what the Evidence Compendium is. So let's take a deeper look at that component of the system. So I click into Evidence Compendium and I'm immediately brought to this big table, okay? And let me just orient you to the screen before I do anything else. At the top, you have these two links that take you between the Evidence Compendium and the Interactive Modeler. And then within the Evidence Compendium, you have these three tabs: the Overall Drug List, which Ron will start with, Comparing on Pricing tab, and an ICER Pricing tab that summarizes those findings. So you see a whole bunch of trade names and generic names of drugs that ICER has reviewed here, as well as several other fields that I won't read through in detail, but suffice it to say there are a lot of things here that you would expect to see. We thought it was very important that we include, based on feedback we got in focus groups and testing it with potential users early on, that we have the population that was evaluated in the comparator group here prominently displayed to remind people, users of the system, what was actually looked at in that particular report. And then over here, again, there's several things that you would imagine would be here, I think. And then two others to call out. One is the breakthrough, orphan, or ultra rare status designation from FDA, which we indicate in this column. And then there's sort of a group of findings from the ICER evidence report that we've summarized here. So the evidence-based medicine rating is here. And then actually one more that I'll mention is the dosage assumptions, which again, we found in testing with folks was an important part of trying to understand, again, what had been looked at. So that's what's in this table. You'll notice that there are these little click boxes at the left. So if I want to search for a specific drug or condition, those click boxes will become relevant. So I'm going to search for psoriasis. Okay, and I have all the drugs now that were part of ICER's psoriasis analysis that was a therapeutic class or a therapeutic area level analysis, condition level analysis. And I can click these checkboxes, and to save some time, I pre-clicked a few of them here for psoriasis drugs that were included in that report, right? And so once I've selected these, they're brought over to my Compare Your Own Pricing tab. So let's go there. And on this tab, again, let me orient you. You have those drugs that I just selected. You have the ability to modify the selections and take one out from the comparison if you want to. These two fields should look familiar from the last tab. And then you have some new things. So you have this comparison prices component of the screen now, where you have the quote unquote ICER benchmark prices, right? The health benefit pricing benchmarks at different dollar thresholds per quality, which again, for many of you will be familiar. I have an input field here that, again, I've pre-populated to try to save some time with a somewhat realistic but fictitious figure, not based on any particular organization's negotiated net price. But these are input fields for an organization that's using this for you to put your net cost in. The estimated net cost that ICER had in the evidence report, and then the wholesale acquisition cost, the WAC. And I can customize this table by clicking over to the customization sidebar here, and I can take out, so modified societal obviously doesn't have a lot of information in it because it wasn't done in this report. And then I can also take out, instead of only having quality adjusted life year, many of you know that equal value life year gained is included as another measure of benefit in ICER's reports going forward, but since it wasn't in this report, I can also take that out, and you see the table adjust. And then I can change the number of pricing thresholds, and you see there's no data in the 200K per quality field, so I can take that out. So now I come back, and I have a let's call it a cleaner table view to look at. So now let's look at what happens if I change these values. So I pre-populated this with 36,700. I can change this figure, right? And you'll see the table automatically adjust. So what's it doing? It's calculating for me how much of a discount off of the net price that I'm putting into this input field would you need to attain, or how much further would you need to get in order to reach the ICER price? And obviously this is a simple calculation that's dynamically updating. The last thing on this tab is to see a graphical view of this information that can help you, again, back to the use cases that Steve outlined. If I'm working on, back at CVS and I'm working on formulary for this area, and I want to see for the drugs that we're considering as preferred or non-preferred or the entire market basket, how close am I with the current rates that we have for a given template formulary to being within the range of cost effectiveness according to ICER's thresholds that were published in the report. So you can see that on this page. And then you can quickly change between perspectives or quality adjusted life year versus EVLYG where it's relevant. So let me close out of that. And then one last thing on the tabs at the top, to see more of a description and more information about the different ICER benchmark prices, you go to the third tab. But the last piece that I want to close with for you on the evidence compendium side is this ability to be able to click into a single agent. So I can click into any single agent that's listed in the table, and you probably noticed from the first tab through the third tab, those drugs are always links that you can click on, and it brings you to this report and meeting snapshot page. So there are a few things here to be aware of. The first one is a new curated video that either Steve or David Rand, ICER's Chief Medical Officer, have produced that averages about 12 to 15 minutes in length, but really gives you a very, I think, sort of powerful and comprehensive synopsis of ICER's review on the topic, as well as highlights using the same slides that were used at the public meeting. In the center, you have a few key materials, some of which you're probably already familiar with, including the report at a glance, but there's also a document that summarizes the patient perspectives and can be used as a standalone piece, as well as this recommendations for fair pricing and fair access that ICER has recently released a bunch of information about, but that can be accessed from the center portion of the snapshot page for any drug as well. And lastly, on the right, there are some short videos that are taken again from the public meeting. Some of you, maybe not all of you, have seen before that these videos in their entirety are available on the ICER website, but now that they've been curated and certain portions taken out to make them easier to digest and use in other presentations and internal deliberations that you might have. One last thing that I do want to mention that I failed to mention before, there's another checkbox on this table customization that's important as my segue over to the interactive modeler. And that's this box that's unchecked here that says manufacturer's alternative price. If this box was live, I could check it and you would see another row populate here on the price comparison tab. That manufacturer alternative price benchmark comes from the interactive modeler, and I'll explain how you would create that over in the next portion, but this is where you would see the output from the interactive modeler. If you're the manufacturer of a particular agent, you would see your chosen output populate into the evidence compendium. So now with that, let's go ahead and go over to the interactive modeler. And I'm immediately presented with this card or category organization that we've chosen for the system. And here in the trial version that all of you, pending your request, for those of you that haven't already, you will gain access to these three models. At the time when the trial period closes and we launch fully, there will be 8 models. And then on a go-forward basis, there'll be 2 sort of components to additions that will be made to the suite of models that are available in the interactive modeler, and you'll see at the screen. Everything that ICER reviews going forward, so all of the analyses and models underlying new evidence reports, will go into the interactive modeler. And then we also have a pipeline or schedule of retrospective models looking backwards that ICER will be putting into the system. So you can imagine this will become sort of dozens of entries, and they're organized into these color-coded condition or therapeutic area categories, starting with these 3: atopic dermatitis, B-cell ALL, so CAR-T here, and then remdesivir and COVID-19. For the purposes of illustrating and demonstrating today, I'm going to use the atopic dermatitis model. So I click into that. I'm brought to this screen that tells me, ICER and their collaborator who were the creators of this model. And then I can click into the model. And I'm brought to what will seem like, a quick click through, but let me just say a word about it. I can choose by checking this box to allow the data that I'm going to put in to be saved. So let me just show, if I click this box and I say open model, the ability for saving is disabled if you click the box. And these buttons are grayed out, right? So they're inoperable now. If I go back and I uncheck the box, so I say that I am actually going to be okay with my data being saved in this session, and I'll explain why you would want to do that, then the model buttons up here will be live, okay? So if I now just orient you quickly to the screen, you've got 3 different components. You've got on the left-hand side these input items, and these are organized into some sub-tabs. You've got the middle of the screen that again are organized into 2 tabs for cost effectiveness outputs and budget impact outputs. So this is sort of your output portion of the screen. And then on the right-hand side, you've got some other materials that we've put together that again, through getting feedback from potential users and feedback from focus groups along the way, we realized would be very helpful, I think, to people as they're figuring out how to use this in their own workflow. So an executive summary, which I'll actually close with, a summary of the health benefit price benchmarks, one-way sensitivity analysis, probabilistic sensitivity analysis, and then the model method, which I'll actually start with because, again, when we were going through the process of development, we heard from many people that they wanted detail about what the actual model structure was. So originally this was conceived to be a place where you could pull up the model structure and gain access to that insight, which a lot of people hadn't had ready access to before. Then we realized there were a lot of other components of information, pieces of information about the model methods that were used that would be useful to have quick access to. So you see these organized into little chapters, little sections here that are available at any time under this button. So let me zoom back out. So to start off with, on the input portion of this screen, I've got these white fields, and all of them are modifiable, okay? And I can click through. So epidemiological, if I'm looking at a particular segment and I need to customize this set of pre-populated values, so everything in those white fields is pre-populated, so you don't have to go into your own data, you don't have to comb through literature to populate these. It starts off with what ICER has chosen to pre-populate them with, but then you can modify them, you can customize them. And so if the mean age of onset was different in a particular population, you could do that. The breakdown, the gender breakdown, how many severe patients there are. And then they're organized into these different sections. So under clinical are many of the things that I think you would intuitively guess would be here, but the dosing, what the dosing interval is, the first cycle compliance. And I'm going to make a couple modifications just to illustrate how the outputs change as you modify these inputs. So I'm going to choose first discontinuation rate. So I'm first I'll say I'm a plan sponsor, I'm a payer, and I'm seeing in my own data for a particular group or for my overall population that the discontinuation rate is a little higher than was seen in the trials and was used by ICER. So I'm going to dial it up to 5. Now watch over on the right-hand side of the screen what happens to the first on the upper left, the extra costs, and then the quality adjusted life years, right, with this new value that I've just changed. Okay, so you see that the costs came down from 194, extra costs from 194,000 to 106. Quality adjusted life years gained also came down from 1.91 to 0.98, right? And the ratios changed, not as much, obviously, because there was a similar change between these two figures that construct them. But you can see how that's a dynamic component of the system. Now you keep on clicking through the tabs here. You have the quality of life and the patient utilities on this tab. And then I'm going to spend a couple minutes on costs. So, because I know for many of you, this is a place where you would use a lot of team time and bring new data into the system. So the annual net price, so now I'm going to be the manufacturer of the particular drug under examination and say that I'm, have negotiated with a large group. And instead of the net price being 31,000, it's 35. Again, watch the right-hand side of the screen, and you'll see the cost adjust. So obviously, in this case, because just the net price went up, nothing changed with the effectiveness part of the equation. The extra costs changed, right? And then scrolling down, you can see that the indices that were used in this particular set of studies and were used in the comparison. And you may remember back to the clinical tab, these were same categories were here between standard of care and dupilumab. But just to stay on cost, between severe and moderate, you can actually make modifications to what the cost was for the folks in different tiers of the scale for the eczema severity index over described over here on the left-hand side. I want to call out quickly this utilization costs, because I know medical cost offsets for many models, many areas that ICER has analyzed are incredibly important to the cost effectiveness picture. In this case, there aren't big, large numbers of hospitalizations and huge buckets of medical cost offsets. So, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to make modifications of this to show you, sort of dynamic changes in the output fields. But suffice it to say that if there are large dollar amounts, and you can see the CPT code for office visits here, blood testing and so on, the laboratory testing that's done here, you can make modifications to those fields for medical cost offsets here and see the dynamic changes on the cost effectiveness as well. So let me move to the budget impact modeling. And there are two places that I need to change. So I'm going to change the inputs to the budget impact modeling and the outputs to budget impact for us to fully look at this. And so you immediately notice that this left-hand side, the input panel, looks very different. So we came up with this funnel that's used a lot, I'm sure, by many of you for different purposes. And to start off with, again, the pre-populated values are the entire US population, since that's what ICER uses in the evidence reports that are published. But you can modify this. So you can go in and say, my plan size, again, I'll be the plan sponsor first, is, I have 2 million lives. So I go in and change that, and you kind of see in the grayed out area that the values changed. So it went down from $94 billion of spend projected for the entire country over the 5-year time horizon, 5-year cumulative horizon, to 594 million. And you can also make modifications to the disease prevalence within that population that you're managing, within the portion of patients who are diagnosed of those prevalent patients, and then how many patients of those diagnosed patients are actually eligible for treatment. And I scroll down a little further and I come to market share. So we've created a way for you to be able to modify the projected market share over that 5-year time horizon. You'll see this dynamic changes take place. I'm going to say that in year 1, there's actually no uptake, and then minimal in year 2, and then it really dials up because there's new data that comes out from another trial in year 3, and you really get a ton of market uptake, right? So you can see that the overall net cost impact and the per patient per year total cost both modified. Before I go to the executive summary quickly, let me just show you this. So if I did choose to save scenarios, which I have chosen to do, I can now go to any of those save scenarios that I've named. So I did a little work beforehand and said I was going to modify to be a particular 150,000 life employer group that maybe as the manufacturer you're going to talk to, or as the plan sponsor, as the PBM or payer you manage, a big ASO group, or I'm a larger health plan with 3 million lives, and so I have that scenario saved here. And if I am the manufacturer of the drug, again, I've saved a scenario, so I've chosen to allow my data for this purpose, for this instance, because I have new real-world evidence that I've now populated these fields and done my customization with. I can save that and then submit it for publication. And if you remember that manufacturer alternative price benchmark checkbox over in the evidence compendium, that's where that published figure, once you have settled on a set of parameters within the interactive modeler side that we're looking at here, is to your satisfaction based on new data that's emerged from trials or a registry or whatever source you as the manufacturer of that agent have come up with, and then have that show side by side by the other pricing benchmarks in the evidence compendium. So we got a lot of interest in that as we were, sort of going through development, and we're happy that we've been able to incorporate it. But that's kind of operationally how you would do it: is save here and then submit for publication. So let me just close this demonstration by saying that there are a couple of very important, I think, for making internal presentation tools that are available on the right. So first is an executive summary that goes through 3 areas, again, that you would probably intuitively think should be an executive summary of this information, but the incremental outcomes here nicely displayed, the cost effectiveness and the budget impact at a high level with a short description. And I'll say, again, everything that I changed as I was going through the demonstration, actually I pulled up a saved scenario here, but those customizations are reflected in this executive summary, of course. So everything that you've done shows up, sort of here in the executive summary. And then if I go back, I can also show you this health benefit price benchmark page, which summarizes a lot of the information, again, on this drug that's being examined from the price benchmark standpoint. So with that, let me close the demonstration. And I'm going to invite my fellow panelists to unmute and bring their cameras on, and I see them there. So let me stop showing my screen. Okay. Welcome, Susan. Welcome, Pat. Thank you for joining us. I think a couple ways that I wanted to have you guys kind of open up that you can each sort of do in turn. I went through obviously a lot going through the evidence compendium and the interactive modeler. And I know for a lot of people, it was a lot of new information. I went through it very quickly. I thought maybe in terms of grounding, before we launch into some of the more specific questions, we could go one at a time, and you could each just give me you've had a chance to look at this a couple of times now, a little more than a lot of folks on the phone. your kind of overall gestalt before we get into some details about use cases in the interactive modeler and the EC, about how this might at a high level help you pursue some of the goals and some of the initiatives that you've already been working on, and then I'll move into the questions. So Pat, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. As you know, Primus Therapeutics has been using the ICER reports for a few years now in their decision-making process through the first off, the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, an external body of physicians, pharmacists, and others that deliberate and provide guidance for our Prime Therapeutics business committee decision making. We then use the ICER reports in those processes as well, and the financial assessments coming after the P&T decisions. Let me just say that there are 5 departments or teams within Prime Therapeutics right now that are consuming and using the ICER reports along the continuum of developing pharmacy benefit coverage determinations. And I just want to lay those out for you all, because I think it's important conceptually that it isn't just the P&T formulary process, but it is 5 different departments, beginning with the formulary process, using the information as you've nicely laid out, Surya, on the compendium. The reports are dense, to be frank, right now. They're deep, they're 100+ pages, they're intimidating. A lot of people to see that, and I know there are summary pieces that are sit out there on your website, but the fact that this is now available just helps us in more condensed fashion find the pieces of information we need. So the formulary and P&T, and in particular, the patient voice, I think, is going to be very helpful. The patient advocacy piece, both the video and the written piece, I'm looking forward to our P&T being able to see those, use those, and help them, because it is difficult right now to get the patient voice into the P&T process, just frankly, at least for us as Prime Therapeutics. I'm not speak for our competitors, but it is challenging, and we're looking forward to doing that. So the other 4 departments, though, importantly, are the utilization management or the medical policy team, and the development of the criteria that frequently exists for these higher expensive products and ensuring safe and effective use. So the UM team, utilization management team, uses the information. The team I work on, the health outcomes and economics team, both in value-based contracting and presenting the financial business case in the decision-making process after the P&T. Our trade relations team in particular, in negotiating with pharmaceutical manufacturers, the direct market access discounts, and I work closely with them for the value-based contracting. And finally, the finance team, the budget team, the forecast team for new products to market. So I think that was really laid out nicely by Steve at the beginning, but I'm reaffirming that, at least at Prime, there are 5 different departments that are using it, and then we'll be able to now more easily use the information that you're providing to help us in decision making.
Awesome, thank you, Pat. Susan.
Great. So thank you for having me. So first, I want to congratulate ICER on both the EC and the IM. I think these are great leaps forward, and it provides us, as Pat just said, a lot of tools to work with. I mean, with the FDA having issued the guidance on HCEI, how can we use this information with regard to, the healthcare economic information with our drugs and devices to, formulary committees or other similar entities that have, knowledge of economic analyses. These tools help us. The FDA pointed out, and rightfully so, when we're discussing this very complex HCEI information, we have to have an accurate overview of things like the design of the economic analyses, the study objectives, who are the populations, what's the time horizon, what's the generalizability, the sensitivity analysis. So all that, I applaud ICER for including in the IM and the EC. For us, for the EC, I mean, we think about all of the information, including the reports, as they are dense, right? But also the videos. I think it's helpful for a manufacturer to take a step back and think through what evidence is necessary for a payer to look at to make a better decision about products or devices that manufacturers provide to society. So I think it's a really great collaboration and interaction between manufacturers and payers and ICER.
Both super helpful sets of comments, and I think nicely introduces a couple of things we were going to cover as we go through some more specific use case questions and so on. You guys teed it up perfectly for me, so thank you. But I thought we'd work backward, and I know I shared with this ahead of time, but just for those who are listening, instead of starting with the evidence compendium, work backward from a lot of the interactive modeler focused use cases first, and kind of work back and open the aperture that way. So as you think about some of the last few things I showed and making adjustments to try to tailor the cost effectiveness of the budget impact modeling, but really kind of the focusing first on the cost effectiveness piece to particular populations. And I'll start with you, Pat. Can you think of a couple examples or ways that you think that ICER analytics can be used to try to kind of supplement the process that you use right now to try to tailor cost effectiveness?
Yes, I'd like to talk about one of the first ones we went in very deep with and helped us with our formulary. Once we had the P&T guidance around chronic migraine products with the CGRPs that came to market back in 18. The report came out in July, so very timely after the approvals in early 18 for some of the products. And as you know, Botox had been on the market for quite a while. It's really the product to go to when other orals had failed. It's a medical benefit product. The ICER report for preventative migraine, like I said, came out in July of 18. And then in early 19, so we used that information in the late part of 18 to go in and glean and make comparisons amongst the products. Now, Botox wasn't specifically modeled out, but there was enough components in the report for us to assess as ICER had, for the inputs of costs to make a comparison amongst the CGRPs, and then within the CGRPs, looking at the report outputs on the economics for our decision making. And in particular, I get to focus on Botox for a second, because in the ICER report, there was some assumptions made that we, in the real world, when we looked at our real world medical claims data for Botox utilization and migraine treatment, and didn't agree with, and so we had to back of the napkin things, for lack of a better term. Those key components were the vial size and the number of units used and the waste that actually occurs when treating migraine with Botox. That was not accounted for in your modeling, that we could now adjust for with the interactive modeler. In addition, the administration costs were different that you assumed. And then the discount, which you used at the time, was the DOD discount, is not really in the marketplace, something that could be achievable. So, those three components really changed our assessment and at least of the value, the price to value. And then we were allowed to do that by the ICER report to make comparisons against the CGRPs. So when you look across the benefits, integrated medical pharmacy, we could then develop a preferred product along with utilization management criteria, med policy criteria, to help us best determine what we should prefer and then lead to better outcomes for our patients, we believe, as a result of that decision making. And it will be just that much more improved by having the interactive model. And in addition to that, we can go and discuss these challenges and differences in cost with the pharmaceutical manufacturers, because frankly, they just discarded the reports because they just didn't agree with them, some of them. So now in the case will be like, let's have a conversation, let's change the inputs, let's negotiate with what you believe are the numbers, and then we can discuss those numbers. I'm really looking forward to using the reports, as well as the outputs will be much easier to show to our business committee decision makers. We can take the images from the interactive modeler you were just showing, Surya, instead of having us to create slides and other things, and I'm really looking forward to that as well.
No, that's great. I think just to dovetail on that, I was hard at work at CVS on some of the same issues, as you know, and I think we probably even talked with the CGRPs back then. And it's a perfect example of one where the assumptions in it did not apply to our situation for any segment either. We really needed to make adjustments on our own and do it manually. And that was one, I think, of many examples that was, sort of somewhere embedded in how we thought about trying to come up with the way that the interactive modeler is organized. So that's a great example. Thank you. Susan, let me turn to you, and instead of maybe you know, I'll go slightly off script for us of the questions that I indicated and say, instead of just asking for more comment on that particular question, I think I might blend it with the next one, and then give you the floor. But I think, you know, if you're trying to make adjustments either to tailor cost effectiveness for a particular population, and then, you know, one idea is, you know, trying to make those adjustments for a particular studied population that might be, you know, more relevant to a particular type of plan that you guys are talking with or presenting to and so on, like a MAPD plan or managed Medicaid plan, any particular plan. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, how you would think about using, it can be the EC also, but really IM mainly, and trying to make the kinds of customizations that you need to make in your organization?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think Pat gave a great example about the necessity to adjust some of the inputs so you can get the exact population you're looking at. I mean, if we think about adjusting the baseline characteristics in any of our models, and then through the utilization of the interactive modeler, I mean, we do want to make sure, and it's incredibly important that the analyses reflect the planned population, right? It not only has to reflect the population, but the characteristics of the population, in addition to, you know, treatment and patterns and cost issues. So anytime that we can adjust those individual areas of the model, the better we can get models that reflect what a particular plan has. And if we think about the modifications, you know, the transparency of the modifications, and we've seen through the IM modeler, is incredibly important. And I would encourage ICER to continue to make as many of those inputs transparent, because once we do a model and make the adjustments, we still put it back through our rigorous scientific review, because we want to make sure that the model in and of itself is not misleading. So again, I think ICER's done a great job with the IM. The more transparent you can make all of the inputs, the better. And I think that we can then respond to individual plans more appropriately.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought up that term. I may have you know, sort of used it in passing when I was going through the demonstration of transparency, but I will say, just to pick up on that point quickly, that for the interactive modeler in particular, I know a lot of people have asked before about having more insight into both the model structures I mentioned at the outset, but a lot of the model parameters and so on. And that was really, you know, sort of a very central goal of the interactive modeler, was to allow for a greater degree of transparency, and then through that transparency, customization, because there are things that, you know, don't fit for the way that either the data has been updated or the way that you need to look at it for a particular segment of the population. So that's great to hear that that you're thinking about using it that way. So let me just stay with you on the next topic too, Susan. I think, you know, is you know, part of your role, I know, and areas of, you know, sort of really important responsibilities for Merck is the integration of real world data and real world evidence. And as we kind of think about, you know, sort of that the emergence of that data, and as it goes through different phases of maturation, how you would, or how you do right now, and how you would like to in the future be rapidly integrating it, which, you know, connects to the last set of comments, but maybe, you know, with a couple of examples of how you might do that. You just talk a little bit about, you know, how you're thinking about not so much like the future of integrating real world data. We could spend an hour on that, but more about, you know, sort of tactically with a tool like this, how it would enable quicker integration of real world data and evidence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you know, any model is not static, right? We're continually getting additional randomized controlled clinical trial data. Maybe we have follow-on periods for our RCTs, or we have scientifically sound real-world data studies. All of that information needs to be integrated back into our models so we can have a better sense of how the RCT data is translating into the real world, and that needs to be reflected in the models. So the more that we can expand the utilization of additional data, again, scientifically sound data to put into our models, the better off we are. And the trick, I think, Suri, that you mentioned is how can you do that rapidly? You want to make sure that your models are sound and aren't misleading, but you want to make sure that that data can rapidly be integrated back into your base model. So you can go back to payers and policymakers that have, the background in health economic information to be able to show them what's happening within the real world. So again, as ICER develops and even develops further the IM, the more you can do rapid integration of those data within the models, the better off I think it'll be. And Pat, the better off it'll be for decision makers. Yeah.
That's a perfect segue. I mean, Pat, you probably have some additional thoughts from your perspective on that topic.
I do, yeah. Thank you, Susan. And I mean, I'm really looking forward to you and I sitting down with the model here soon. I'll also just say, having been in this space for almost 20 years now, this ICER model allows for, is really an unbiased, credible source of information. And I'm going to emphasize unbiased here. There are plenty of models that are out there that are both in the medical literature, published generally by pharmaceutical manufacturers or those manufacturers that funded an academic to do the model and build it. They typically also, those models aren't easily translatable and comparable across conditions. They're usually disease-specific type of modeling, and the outcomes are very difficult from a comparison, like I say, across classes for decision makers like myself. They end up with apples to oranges comparables on the outcomes and the metrics. ICER now, with their modeling, is a consistent methodology. It may not be the best, but it does allow for an apples to apples comparison across conditions. And I'll just add, the Academy of Managed Care Pharmacy and their dossier, where they work very hard to create a compendium of information. It's an outstanding tool. The models, though, that are in there, as I just said, in terms of publication and models they're built by the pharmaceutical manufacturer, there's always an incentive to try to create a scenario to the payer that will put their product in the best light. And frankly, I've given up looking at the AMCP models because of the difficulty in just assessing it with an unbiased lens. So not to make a knock on the Academy of Managed Care's, Academy of AMCP's dossier, but this does allow for, I think, a much easier conversation that we can then put in different inputs, negotiate, and come to the best price to value for the patient.
Yeah, no, I think, look, I mean, you start to dig into a lot of the issues, I think, that led us to, again, to the creation. And I'm, obviously extremely interested and more than interested, bullish on the ability of tools like this. I'm not saying this is the only tool that will emerge that can help this process go forward, but I think that idea of having, the very, sort of succinct way to say it, and to use a little bit of a cliche, is to have a single source of truth that both sides, but everybody who's using it feels is less biased. And yes, there is going to be a skeleton, there's a schematic and a model structure, as I showed in the interactive modeler, that underpins this. But also, I think once you get comfortable with that, the ability to be able to change all of these values and do it, and to use Susan's word from earlier, transparent, but also in a way that allows you to say, like, the other assumptions that were made were not biased. There's nothing else hidden here that is, that one side or the other could say is a biased set of assumptions. So I think that, Pat, it highlights a couple of the ways in which we're really hoping that this becomes actionable for the market. And let me just ask Susan if she has any other comments, and if not, I can move to the next area.
Yeah. No, thank you. And Pat, I agree. For models to be helpful, they need to be transparent, right? So we like to publish our models. We like to publish the structure of the model, because you want your models to be used by decision makers so they can make a better decision. And so again, I applaud ICER on the work that they've done in the IM, and I'm for full transparency of the structure of the inputs, of where the inputs come from. I mean, I think that's the only way that these models can truly be used by decision makers, so patients can get access to innovative medicines and vaccines.
Great, thank you. I think this next topic that we had that I sort of teed up based on the areas that Steve outlined at the beginning and our sort of intent and different ways that the system can be used can be pretty brief, but I do want to cover it again. And Pat, I'll start one more time with you. And that is kind of formulary design and development. You already sort of talked about this a little bit, but just in case you have any other comments, I think just to highlight a couple of things that I showed. In the evidence compendium side, there was the ability on the middle tab, the compare your pricing tab, to be able to get both the visual display of drugs that are being considered for preferred or non-preferred status, or the entire market basket I was talking about, and how they fit into the cost effectiveness range or don't, based on the net price. And then on the IM side, there's the ability to say, if things are changing and there's been a therapeutic class review, for instance, what's the cost effectiveness of each of those agents as you make customizations. So anything else? I know you mentioned you had your National P&T Committee meeting recently. Anything else that maybe coming out of that, fresh in your mind and thinking about formulary design and development, that this will unlock for you?
Yeah, a few things here. One in particular, thanks for asking that question, is in the vein of value-based contracting. And we just had a press release on a value-based contract that we have with now Biohaven for their acute migraine treatment. So I'll stay in the theme of migraine. And the report from ICER was instrumental in helping us negotiate that contract. And I look to now the interactive modeler, and in particular, to be able to negotiate value-based contracts with pharmaceutical manufacturers. Because if we can agree upon the outputs that are in the ICER report and the inputs, and more importantly, the inputs that go into the ICER report with the discount that could come, and then the expected value to come as ICER has identified in their reporting and agreed to as the inputs, then we can have terms in a value-based contract. And in particular, you can go out and check out our press release with Nurtec, Biohaven on Nurtec. But because Biohaven participated quite closely with ICER in developing the acute migraine report, which they encourage all manufacturers to provide information and be a part of the report and model development. Now, some manufacturers choose not to, and maybe this is going to provide impetus for them to be more involved. Both the fact that the ICER has the interactive modeler, that they can then, as a manufacturer, go out to individuals like myself and others as payers to have discussions around the inputs. But I really feel that the value-based contracting is a key piece of what this could help us all with, make our lives easier. Having been in value-based contracting space now for upwards of 10 years, negotiated many contracts, many didn't come to fruition, and also doing the reporting on them and fulfillment, and gone through audits with pharmaceutical manufacturers associated with the value-based contracts. The ICER modeler, I'm looking forward to it to make my life easier.
That last, can I quote you on that last one? I'm looking forward to making my life easier. I love that.
You can quote me on that.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, and I think of the last two areas that I wanted to focus on, I'm just gonna make a choice here to talk about budget impact modeling. And Susan, maybe I'll start this time with you and then go to Pat. I think, first of all, the budget impact modeling, I mean, obviously both organizations have different ways of thinking about this and thinking about, on the payer side, we're really trying to think about often, based on my experience, a specific segment. It's rarely that we're doing overall in the US population, as I was showing first on the default values, the pre-populated values, and the interactive modeler. Anything that you would say about the way that you guys maybe use, and maybe it's not even just specifically budget impact modeling as an area of investigation, but thinking about or projections and forecasting, but just forecasting more broadly instead of just related to budget impact, and using sort of what the IM has in it to be able to help with any of those sort of use cases that you have, Susan, and then I'll move to Pat.
Yeah, so I do want to say thank you to ICER for including the total cost of care into the models in addition to the cost offsets. I think that's really helpful as we think about our modeling, whether it's a budget impact model or cost effective model. But we certainly use, we calculate budget impact models, and we can use the IM because it allows for the analysis that we've been talking about this past half hour to be more specific to the payer organizations and the inputs that the payer organizations would like. So we certainly will, we were just looking at the model. We're one of those users that asked for a free trial, so we can go into the models, but certainly the budget impact models are going to be incredibly important as we move forward. I mean, I think for any model, we can disagree on the data interpretation of the model, but what we need to agree on are all the inputs and how we're going to construct those models. So again, I mean, I think these are great tools that allow us to have better conversations, like with you, Pat, and your organization.
Thank you, Susan. Pat?
Yeah, so a few years ago, we in the insurance industry were all Civaldi'd, using it as a verb. We weren't prepared for that expense. So we built out a team, as did many other payers, dedicated to forecasting. I'm looking forward to using the interactive model to help us triangulate and sure-face validity of our forecasts. To your point, Surya, it's really helpful also in the forecasting to bring it to line of business, Medicaid, Medicare, commercial. They're going to be very different uptakes potentially for a product that's going to be used in the elderly. In Medicare versus commercial or Medicaid, as you well know, Surya, we've been asking for pharmaceutical manufacturers for the last 5 years that when you come talk to us about your forecasted uptake, you explain it by those lines of business, which it was a surprise for them 5 years ago. They're getting better at it now. But being able to use the interactive modeler, like I say, to triangulate, we input our data, feel good about our forecast, but also make the changes over time. I mean, when you show Dupixent, dupilumab, we forecasted that product, and when you were just plugging in numbers, I saw like $7 PMPM. That's what freaks people out, So being able to actually also adjust the forecast based on expected adherence or persistency is super important. There are assumptions that are made based on RCTs that show, RCTs, the adherence rates are just, they're not real. They're close to 100% typically. A good example, CGRPs even, the adherence rates that are a part of the RCTs are very high. Real world is much lower than that. So if we just change the adherence rates, that actually changes the budget impact forecast. That simple little edit that allows for real world inputs, very helpful.
Awesome. Well, let me take this opportunity. We just have a minute left here. You both gave great, sort of insights and feedback, I think, on the tools and insights for the group. So incredibly helpful to have you both. So thank you. And with that, let me turn it back over to Steve for a very brief closing. And
guys, thank you so much, Surya and Susan and Pat. That was really, really helpful. I don't know about you, but like Pat, I can't wait to get my hands on ICER analytics. No, I would say that we've been able to cover a fair amount of ground today, but I didn't want to sell short, again, the usefulness of this tool that we envision for other folks, patient groups who can really see how their contributions are being made available to payers and the impact that that can have. Purchasers who want to track how their PBM is managing things in relationship to ICER prices, investors and others. But this idea that it can catalyze new kinds of conversations and really also create an even bigger market for good real world evidence, because what's really going to happen with the interactive modeler is that real world evidence is going to flow back into alternative assumptions, updated assumptions, just in the way that it should. So we're very optimistic. We know we have a lot to learn, but we're very optimistic, and we're really willing to roll up our sleeves and work hard with you to make this a better tool over time as well. So what you're seeing now on the slide is where you can email to start your free trial, and Amazon may not be able to get it to you by Christmas, but if you jump into this, we might. So, and we know that there are also going to be many questions, and we hope to be able to respond to those in time as quickly as we can. So with my great thanks and appreciation to Surya, to Susan and Pat, I'd also like to acknowledge our partner, FormularyDecisions.com, who is helping us make sure that we can get access and knowledge about the ICER analytics out to as many folks as possible. And our technology partner, Digital Health Outcomes, that is, in a sense, the brawn behind the interactive modeler. So with thanks to all of them, I hope you have a healthy holiday season, and we hope that you will join the community who will be exploring the use of ICER analytics in the future. Thank you very much.